Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the London's Pretty Cool podcast. We're coming at you with a great episode before the Thanksgiving weekend. If you're listening to this prior, happy Thanksgiving. Hope you enjoy your long weekend. And if you're listening to this after, hope you enjoyed. After the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, London was deemed the Golden City, after 4 of Canada's 7 gold medalists came from Londoners. Today we are speaking with one of those gold medalists, Susanne Grainger of the Women's 8 rowing team. We have grown up hearing about the Canadian women's rowing team, with our mom working at UTRCA at Fanshawe Conservation, where they used to practice. So to be able to speak to a member of the team after winning a gold medal was pretty surreal, and I'm happy to say I think this is one of our best ones yet. Remember to subscribe and follow us on social media to stay up to date with all the pretty cool things going on in the Forest City. Without further ado... So hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the London's Pretty Cool podcast. My name is Erin Briggs.
And I'm Patrick Briggs.
And we are here with Susanne Grainger, the Olympic gold medal winner from the Canada Women's 8 rowing team. Thank you so much, Susanne, for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Susanne, you don't know, before we get started, just how much clout that we have gained just already in the last day, mentioning people, oh, I'm just interviewing an Olympian today. Like, they go, do you need to get out of work early? Is
That's so funny. It's still weird to have that be a thing with myself. People don't usually care much about rowing, and it's not a massive spectator sport. So it's still quite new and exciting to have people recognize or get excited to chat with me.
So let's go right back to the beginning. So rowing is not really the kind of sport that people just get kind of thrown into. Like, usually you start soccer or doing something like that. How did you start getting into rowing?
I actually started rowing in grade 8. I grew up in Florida. I am Canadian, but grew up in Florida. And when we moved back to Canada, I was in the very angsty teenager stage, and my parents were like, we need to get her into something so she can meet friends, move on past this, like, I hate my parents phase. And one of our family friends was the rowing coach at a high school in town. And he said, well, how tall are you? And I was like, well, I'm 6'2". And he was like, you should try rowing. And at this point, I had tried every single sport. I played basketball, I played soccer, tennis, volleyball, swimming, golf, and was always told that I had athletic ability and that I was naturally talented, but was just not great at any of these sports. I was always told to stand under the net in basketball, put my hands up, and if I caught the ball, just get rid of it as fast as you can. Like, don't you dare dribble and try and go down the court. Just pass it to somebody else. So when I tried rowing, I don't know if it was an actual natural ability or if it was just a smart coach who knew that I needed to hear that I was making progress. But I felt like when I put the effort in, I got better. Mm-hmm. And I started doing it in grade 8 and thought I was improving, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah, the idea of starting at such a young age, I think, is so interesting because, like you said, when you're not normally fitting into most of these average sports, you've got to try and find something for that outlet. I remember when I was young, I did fencing, like sword fighting, for people who don't know. And it's just like, you got to do something, something active. If football isn't your thing or soccer isn't your thing. And I'm glad you found something in London that was accessible to you, like rowing, that turned into something like this.
Yeah, no, I feel very lucky to have found a sport that I actually enjoyed and was able to improve in. Because in the, I guess at that time, 13 years of my life, I had felt quite mediocre at most sports I had taken part in.
Mm-hmm. That's a tough pill to swallow sometimes, but I'm sure it feels better now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of still surreal to be in this position.
Speaking of where you came from and everything, though, what is the rowing scene like in London? Our mom actually works at the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority, where I'm sure you are very familiar with training. So is there a large rowing program in the city?
It's changed a little bit in the last couple of years, but when I was there rowing, it was a huge thing. I guess in the rowing world, London, Ontario, and Ontario is the majority of where rowing happens in Canada. Yeah, I don't know if it's the population or what. It's interesting given that, I mean, in BC, you can row all year round because the climate is so mild, but the majority of rowing participants are apparently in Ontario. And so when I was there in high school, the boathouse that I trained out of at the Fanshawe conservation area was where I think almost all high schools and the national team Western trained and practiced. And so it was a fairly small boathouse, but I mean, we made it work, and it was cool to be able to cross paths with the national team rowers. And I mean, I idolized those women, and to be able to be in the same change room with them after practice and sort of hear them talking about what they did that day was a really cool experience. I mean, I loved training on Lake Fanshawe. In the past couple of years, the rowing program for the national team sort of transitioned to BC, but I was actually just back in London not too long ago, and I was able to go out on the lake and visit my old stomping grounds, and it was always a very popular spot when we trained there.
How would you compare it to the other, because you probably trained and competed all over the world, how would you compare kind of Fanshawe Lake to those other kind of training facilities?
The actual lake, I think, is a great place to train. One thing with rowing is that it's an outdoor sport, so you're sort of, the elements you're just have to deal with. If it rains, you get rained on. If it's windy, you row in the wind. And so I think Lake Fanshawe was particularly special because of the shape of the lake. It's sort of almost an L. And so if it was really windy, because of the shape, you could usually find a place where you were somewhat protected by the trees on the shore. And so very rarely did we ever get blown off the water because of wind. And so we got a lot of training done, and the distance and the size of the lake allowed us to get a good number of kilometers in. A standard rowing practice for us could be anywhere from 20 to 28 kilometers for one practice. And that can get quite monotonous when you're turning every 2 kilometers. So Fanshawe was great for that because you could do some big sort of 10-kilometer loops and bust out practice in a much more efficient manner. I think depending on how you're training can really affect the ranking of a lake in someone's mind. But I mean, Fanshawe was always a great place to train. I've raced in some pretty cool places, but as far as like day-to-day training goes, I think it's pretty high up there in the ranks in my mind.
That's so cool. I had no idea that London was the place for rowing. I knew that we knew growing up that we've seen the rowing teams practice in that area. We've grown up seeing that kind of stuff happen, but to know that it's such a central hub, that's so interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if I didn't know until I was a part of it. When someone said, "Hey, you should try rowing," I was like, "What's that? I don't know what that is." But once I was in it, it was pretty cool to see. Like, I had no idea the national team trained in London, Ontario, and that as a kid I grew up like kilometers away from people who were racing at the Olympics. Like, the people that I watched on TV were essentially in my backyard. So it's like a little hidden secret of the city.
You mentioned that rowing wasn't always your first choice of sport. But did you have dreams initially when you were young still of going to the Olympics?
At a certain age, yes. I always watched the Olympics, loved the idea of competing at something that was bigger than yourself. It wasn't necessarily about you, but as the country as a whole. I think I didn't really realize that the Olympics was a dream that I could have until I started rowing. The coach that I had was amazing and sort of was the person to say like, hey, you know, if you really like this is something it's realistic for you. Like, it's not impossible. If you say, I want to go to the Olympics, like, you're on that track, you could do it. It takes work, but you could get there. And so I think at that point I was kind of like, wow, like maybe I'll give this a shot. So I think from when I started rowing and started seeing progress, that was sort of when I said, I want to be an Olympian. I want to compete for Canada. I've always been a little bit competitive by nature. And so I think when someone put me in a sport and said, like, you have the opportunity to do really well at this, I was sort of like, okay, cool, challenge accepted. Like, let's see if I can get to the pinnacle of sport. I like to, you know, prove myself right and prove people wrong. So it worked, I guess, to get me to this point. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
And so now on this journey, you've become, I don't know what you, like, if you're a professional rower, is that like the proper term? But like, what does your day-to-day kind of look like being a Olympic rower?
Yeah, I guess given that I'm paid to train, I guess by definition, I could technically be a professional athlete, but it's very different than an athlete, you know, in basketball or soccer, or someone who actually have professional season. Rowing is not, I don't do it for the money, that's for sure. You have to love it. But yeah, our day-to-day is quite extensive. It's a lot of hours. It's a full-time job. So in a normal training week, we would train 2 to 3 times a day, 6 to 7 days a week. So it ends up being up like 6 to 8 hours of training a day.
Wow.
So it's full time.
Yeah, full time.
Yeah.
Does it start right from the get-go with that sort of schedule and routine? Like, what's the incline like with the training regimen?
Like when I would have started training in high school?
No, I guess like
even naturally.
Like for the when you were like, I could actually become an Olympian, did you immediately start like, all right, I'm gonna find a way to make this like a 7-day straight thing? Or what was I guess what was the process to it becoming that?
It's definitely a progression. I think one thing that is easy to lose in this journey is that it takes it's small steps to get there. And so when I started rowing, thinking about an Olympic goal seemed like this daunting thing. You don't know how to get there. And so I think looking back, it's very clear that there were small steps along the way. So when I started training in grade 8, I just joined the high school practices, which were in the afternoon. Every once in a while there was a morning one, but for the most part, it was just once a day. And then we would have one day off a week. But I mean, at the time it felt like a lot, but looking back, it was fairly low key. And then I think in high school, every once in a while, we maybe trained twice a day, but it was before we'd have a race or something coming up. Like we went to Canadian Henley and St. Catharines. And so I think around that time, we would potentially train before school and after school. When I went to university, I think that was my first introduction to more regular 2-a-day trainings. We would stay around for spring break and not go home. Anytime you had a large chunk of time off, you had rowing practice. So it was a very different university experience, but we would sort of, that 2 weeks off was very much like training at the national team, 2 practices a day, sometimes 3, just training straight through. But in a normal school week, we would usually train once a day. And then sometimes train twice a day. I think actually now talking, excuse me, to some of the people who I know who are at school in UVA still, they train twice a day now. But coming to the national team was my first consistent experience with full-time training, 6 to 8 hours a day. So it was a progression. I think I always thought when I was in the moment that I was training as hard as I possibly could. And then making that next step, I was always like, wow, this is what training actually is. And so it was crazy to get to the national team. And even in the last couple of years, we've changed things along the way. Like, you always think there's no way I could possibly learn more or have done something differently, but it keeps happening. So it's small steps.
And all this like daily training, the 2-a-days, you're not on the water the whole time, right? There's a whole bunch of different kinds of things that you do throughout the day.
Yeah, absolutely. We usually row in the morning as our first practice. And then sometimes our second practice is a row. And if we're doing 3-a-days, our final practice of the day is weights. And so depending on the time of year, we would potentially be on the water for both of those rows. And so rowing outside and then weights. Sometimes in the winter, if the weather is a little bit dicey, we'll row as much as we can, but sometimes we train inside on the rowing machine, the ergometer, or we'll cross train, which is any other mode of sport, running, biking, pretty much anything other than a rowing movement. So I think it was important in a lot of the training that we've done to mix that up. And so we do try to focus on the rowing motion and, row and erg, but we did also add in weights and other cross training.
You don't want to become like the arm wrestling person with the one giant arm and the one tiny arm, right? You got to work everything out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually a little bit of a struggle in the type of rowing that I do. I'm a sweeper, which means that when I row, I only have one oar. And so I face out to a certain side. And so when you've rowed as long as I have, you can build up muscles on one side of your body and not the other. And so one of the coaches that I had along the way was very smart and told me to learn how to row both sides, which increased my ability of getting selected for a boat, but it also helped balance out my body a little bit. But by nature of it, I mean, I've been on port, the side that I've rowed now, for a couple of years consistently. And so I definitely have some imbalances, but there's only so much you can do.
You compete in the women's 8, like Erin mentioned earlier. For those that don't know, do you mind explaining what that is? It's obviously 8 people in a boat, I'm guessing, right?
There's actually 9 of us in the boat.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so there's 8 rowers, and then the coxswain, who steers and sort of calls our race plan. She's the brains of the boat. Everyone in the boat has a different role. And so in an 8, there's 4 ports and 4 starboards. And so ports face out one direction, starboards face out the other. So if you watch a boat from the front, you can sort of see the split of the people, which is quite cool. But the coxswain sits in the stern of the boat, but because we go backwards, stern will cross the finish line last, which is always a bit confusing for people watching it on television when they're calling out who's in what seat. And then the seats count down. So the coxswain sits in stern, and then the first person in front of her is 8 seat. And they're the stroke of the boat, so they set the rhythm. And the person behind them, 7, sort of supports that, because most of the time it's port starboard. And so they set the rhythm for the boat that everybody supports. The middle of the boat is considered the powerhouse. It's usually where you put your large, strong athletes who have great cardiovascular fitness and can really carry you through the middle of the race. I sit in 5 seats, so I'm sort of dead center of the powerhouse of the boat. And then the bow of the boat, which will be the first to cross the finish line, is where you usually put your very technical rowers. Everyone in the boat will be fit, so don't get me wrong, but there's people who have really great technique and are suited to different spots of the boat better. And so in the bow, you usually put people who have great technique, because that area of the boat can actually affect the set and how the boat feels more than some of the other seats can. So everybody in the boat has a sort of specific job, and is more suited to different spots in the boat. But I think bringing us all together and making 9 people work is usually quite an impressive feat.
How far is the distance that you rowed too? When I watched you win the gold medal, I was really surprised actually at how long the race was.
Yeah, our races are 2 kilometers long, which is long and short all at the same time. 2 kilometers in a women's 8 takes, well, it took us 5 minutes and 59 seconds, but because it's an outdoor sport, the elements can really affect that. The world record, I believe, is now 5:52 or 5:53, which was set in our race in the rep. And so it can be quite quick. 5 minutes and 52 seconds is shockingly fast compared to how fast boats have gone in the last couple of quadrennials. But having a tailwind behind you can really help. I think it's actually quite crazy to think that the last world record was actually set in 2013, and in the rep that I was in Tokyo, Romania beat us by a very small margin and officially set the world record. But even though we came second, we still broke the previous world record that had been set in 2013. So for 2 boats to go under a world record speed is crazy. I think it's great for women's rowing. Boats are getting that fast. But yeah, so over 2 kilometers in a women's 8, it's really become a full-on sprint. Everybody's, racing as hard as they can, but you sort of plan a race plan so that you don't sprint as hard as you can and die off, which we call a fly and die. But in a women's 8 now, because there's just so much raw power in these boats, it's just becoming a sprint, and times are getting faster and faster every year. Mm-hmm. So I will say, when you're in a 2 kilometer race, it feels long.
Yeah.
When you're in that kind of pain cave, 5 minutes and 59 seconds is long enough.
That's funny you referenced the pain cave. That's what the announcers were referencing a bunch while you guys were rowing. I thought that was so funny. So that is a phrase that's used in general in the rowing scene?
Yeah, I think anything that has to do with pain, hurt locker, pain cave, your dark place inside your brain, it's all quite relatable in the rowing world. I always touch on that topic gently because I want to inspire the next generation and not make them afraid, but you can't lie, like it hurts, if you're crossing the finish line and you have something left, you've done it wrong.
Right.
So the pain cave is definitely a thing.
And so before we get into we were touching on it, getting into these Tokyo Olympics, how does the rowers get chosen for the Olympic team?
We go through a selection process. The national team center is what will eventually become the Olympic team. There's usually a group of athletes that train at the national center who have been invited to be there over the quadrennial. And then as you get closer to the Olympics, they start to sort of whittle down the team to the number of people who will go to the Olympics. And so in that process is what we call selection. And we'll do seat racing in all different sizes of boats. So we'll seat race in the 8, we'll seat race in 4s, and seat race in pairs. But essentially the point of that is to switch and move people around and see what the effect on the boat is. And so if you're doing it in 2 4s, you can directly compare how fast 2 people are to each other. And so we'll usually do them at 1,500 meters because typically we'll do at least 4 pieces back to back. And so if you're doing that over 2 kilometers, the drop off in fatigue usually is quite large versus 1,500 meters is just short enough and just long enough to compare people, but you can do a couple of them back to back. And so we'll race a 1,500 meter piece and then switch two people from boat to boat and then go out and race them again. And you can sort of see what has happened in the speed and who's faster. And sort of from there, you can create a ranking in the team and create boats based on speed, or at a certain point, there's people who can be very close in speed. And so you can have like the top 7 ranked and put them in an 8 and then sort of seat race the last person in and out to see if somebody meshes with the people in the boat better, or if someone has a bigger difference on the balance or the set of the boat. But selection is a very long process. It doesn't have to be, but if you're really sort of leaving no stone unturned, it can take a long time. We were in selection going into the Olympics for about 6 months.
Wow.
So it can be quite stressful because, I mean, at some point, the people that you're racing against are eventually going to be your teammates and the people that you race the world with. So it's an interesting dynamic to be constantly in competition with your best friend, but then also know that when it's done, you're going to, you know, race other people with them. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that first time that, because this was your second Olympics going into Tokyo, you did go to Rio. So that first time that you were told that you're going to be part of the Olympic team, how did that feel when you got that kind of nod?
It was pretty surreal. I think rowing is interesting in that you kind of know before you get told, because you've gone through the selection process, you've seen where you like rank on the team. If you've won your seat race and you get sort of put in a seat before it's officially announced, you have an idea it's coming. But at the same time, you don't ever want to assume, because that's the moment that someone will, beat you and the rug gets yanked out from underneath you. But I remember when I was announced and officially told the world that I was going to go compete in my first Olympics, we went to Toronto and had a day of media. And I just remember thinking, like, this is something that I watched on TV as a kid. And I, saw my idols on television getting ready to go compete against the best in the world. And now I'm the one standing in that spot. And so it was pretty wild to think, oh my gosh, like I've made it to that level. Like I'm now the person that people are watching to see how they do and, look to for a role model. So I remember being very blown away and very excited, but it's a lot to take in that moment.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, maybe I don't even know if I can.
All right, so let's get into the big day, what everyone's been waiting for. It's the day of your final race, Tokyo 2021. You wake up in the morning of the race. How are you feeling? Were you nervous? Did you kind of have this good feeling? Did you feel like the team was ready? What's it like going into that?
I definitely felt like we were ready. I was definitely nervous, but the thing about being at this level is it's the Olympics, so it's big, it's huge, but it's still a 2-kilometer race. You're still in the same boat with your teammates. The only thing that's different is there's Olympic rings everywhere. And so it kind of hits you over and over again that that's where you are, because otherwise it looks the same as a world champs or a World Cup, because you're racing the same people from other countries that you have. And so that helps kind of bring down the nerves so that you can remain at a sustainable level. But waking up that morning, I think, honestly, I was the most nervous about not performing the way I knew we could. It takes a lot to be able to make it happen on the day, because you can be 100% prepared, be the fittest team in the world, and just not have your best performance. And that is quite scary, because you've put 4-5 years in this case into that moment, and looking at it potentially not going your way, I think is the biggest worry in my eyes, because we had everything to lose in that moment. So I was quite nervous waking up that morning, but I knew we were ready. We had a great team meeting the night before, our coach sat us down and said, we're technically ranked 4th going into this final, but that means nothing on the day. All you have to do is be the best crew on the day. We know that we've put in the work. We know we've put in the time. We have a great plan. All we have to do is execute what we know we can do. And so if I'm being totally honest, going into that final, I knew that we had the ability to stand on the podium, even the center of the podium, but was worried that we wouldn't put it together when it mattered. And so I always believed in us, but I didn't expect to win. I wanted to, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But it's pretty, it's just wild when it happens the way you've always dreamed it too.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely woke up nervous that morning, but we were ready.
What were you thinking right before the race started?
I do a special thing before every single race. When I sit at the start line, there's actually a lot more time to sit there than you would think. Usually you're allowed to pull into the starting gate 5 to 7 minutes before your race starts. And then once you get sort of locked into the boot, which just holds your boat in place and makes sure that everyone has the same starting point, you just sit and wait. And those are the longest 5 minutes I've ever experienced in my life, because they announce it every single minute that ticks by. And so we've come up with things. It's brutal. We've come up with things as a team to sort of focus us in those moments. And one of the things that I do specifically is think about everybody who's helped me get to that moment. Because even though 9 of us are sitting on the start line, there have been hundreds of people that have helped us get to that point. And thinking about those people in that moment makes you feel less alone. Not that you feel lonely at a start line, but it sort of allows you to know that like there's people supporting you, that no matter what the result is, they'll be there for you. And so I thought about them, and I also thought that I wanted to choose freedom from regret. Leaving Rio, we came 5th, which honestly is a massive, like that's a huge success. Being 5th in the world is really cool, but when you went in as a medal favorite, it can be a lot to take in. A tough pill to swallow, walking away without something that you probably shouldn't have expected, but did expect to happen. And so I sat on that start line thinking, I'm not leaving anything behind. I'm going to race my heart out, do everything that we said we were going to do, stay so focused into this boat so that if we walk away in 6th place, as long as we've had the race of our lives and have done everything that we can, you can't be upset. You just got beat by a better crew. So I sat on the start line thinking about people who've supported us and really trying to get my mind prepared to leave it all out there.
That's such like a great things to think about, like especially just leave with no regrets as soon as you go, as long as you leave everything out there. And sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
No, I was gonna add to that. I just think there's so much to that. I'm sure like the way you're describing it, I was just thinking like during the race, you must have these moments like going, oh my gosh, like we're leading, like do you have that like that moment hit you while you're going, like because like you said, you go, we're gonna leave it all out on the line there. And so is it you're staying so focused in that you don't even notice your position until the very end sort of thing? Or is it partway through, are you going, hey, we're doing pretty good, I'm gonna like see what else I have in here, to try and finish this out?
It's a little bit of both, honestly. Our coxswain, her name is Kristen Kit, we call her Kit, who sits in the front of the boat, does an amazing job of letting us know where we are in a race, so that we don't have to look out and sort of try to figure out ourselves, because that can sort of disrupt the rhythm of a boat and draw away from focus. And so she did a really good job of telling us where we were. But we'd learned in the previous 2 races that we've been a part of that even if you're winning with 500 meters to go, or the last quarter of the race, that doesn't matter. It really change in that last 90 seconds. And so, you know, she said to us with 500 meters to go, like, you're leading, but like, it's never enough. Like, you've got to keep going. And so with, you know, that last 500 to go, we had talked about this so many times as a team, and I knew what we were capable of. But it's scary knowing that you're sitting in first and that can be taken away from you. And so I broke all rules and looked out of the boat with 250 meters to go, which is about 45 seconds. And I remember trying to do the math as to where we were, because she had told us where we were, but I mean, I just couldn't believe it. And so I remember looking out and being like, okay, who am I seeing? Like, are we ahead? And you're in such a hurt locker that I couldn't tell. And so I was like, you know what? I have no idea. Just don't stop. But in the last 10 strokes of the race, I don't remember much of the race, but in the last 10 strokes, she said, you are going to be Olympic champions.
Wow.
Wow.
It was wild.
Wow.
I remember sort of letting that sit. I was like, really?
Oh,
and so I can't like compute what's happening in that moment. And so when we crossed the finish line, the like pure shock on everyone's face is 100% real. Like, the genuine celebrations and reactions that came out of us were just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened. So I at points knew we were leading, but you never want to feel content and like settle for that, because things can just change so quickly.
That's amazing. That is amazing.
In these big kind of races, like you were saying, you're kind of in that hurt locker or that pain cave. How do you push through that when it's like everything hurts, you feel completely exhausted, but it's like, I only have 250 meters left. I got to just keep going.
We do a lot of training and practice with our sports psychologist about, you know, how to ignore that voice in the back of your head, or how to push past where you think your limits are. Positive mental talk. A lot of discussion with her has helped us along the way, but at the same time, we really sort of train in that zone a lot as well. And so we did one workout that I will never forget, that was 16 by 500 meters. And so it's essentially doing a quarter of the race 16 times with equal rest. And so it's essentially 90 seconds on, 90 seconds off, and it hurts. And so when you get to those last 2 or 3 500-meter pieces, you're going to be hurting in those like you would at the end of a race, if not maybe a bit more. And so knowing how you react in those moments and thinking over what works to get you through that hard practice are techniques that you can bring into races, so that when you get into that last 250 meters, when you think you have literally nothing left in your body, you know where to go to try and keep your mind focused, sort of stay with everybody, ignore the tunnel vision, ignore the loss of hearing, and keep pushing when it counts.
Amazing. When you won, which was such an incredible celebration to watch, what's it like trying to celebrate on a rowboat? I've been on one of those before. They are not the most stable things in the world.
No, luckily the 8 is one of the most stable, given its size, but your feet are tied into the boat. And so in the video, I think I leaned back to the girl behind me and just sort of laid down in her lap, because there's really no other way without me taking my feet out and turning around and sort of leaping onto her that I could celebrate in that moment, because you're also exhausted. You've gone through this thing, and so thinking about standing or trying to move is brutal. I mean, you're like shaking and like quivering and all this stuff. And so, I mean, the only thing I could do was lean back and try and hug her backwards. But I mean, our coxswain Kit, like, she just stood right up in that boat, threw her hands in the air, and then leapt into the arms of our stroke seat. And so it's, I think in that moment, you don't ever really know what's going to happen. We've visualized a lot of like how we would imagine a race going, what we want to see, what you want to feel. And so we visualize winning, because if you can't see it yourself and believe it, it's not going to happen. And so having visualized that moment, you think in your head, you know what you're going to do, you know how you would react, but when it actually happens and you cross the finish line, sort of, it's just not like, I don't even know what takes over, but the rowing gods will dictate in that moment. And luckily we didn't flip that boat with her standing in there, but it's yeah, I don't know. It's a wild thing. And I think, especially when you know you're going to stand in the middle of a podium and you went in ranked 4th and no one thought that was going to happen, it's kind of crazy to look across and see your name with a number 1 like written on it at the finish line. So it's all quite surreal.
What a memorable celebration too. Like, I think that'll be something that not only the gold will be remembered, but the just the joy on everybody's face, the splashing the water, and it's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And so you guys have won gold in like world championships or world cups before. What's the difference in winning an Olympic gold to these other championships?
I think my best example for that is my Rio experience. Leading into Rio, I stood on every single international podium that we competed in, except for 2. One being the World Cup right before the Olympics and the Olympics. And so leading into Rio, I'd stood on over 10 international podiums in silver, gold, bronze, like every single position. I think the difference, like those are so exciting to win, and it's amazing because it's a step on your path. For rowing, the Olympics is the pinnacle, it's the be all end all, it's what you're training for. Those are World Cups and World Champs are goals along the way. They're tells of where you are in your training, how you compare against the world, but all with the Olympics in mind. And so it's very exciting to win any international medal, defeat for sure, but having stood on almost every single podium leading into the Olympics in Rio and then not standing on the podium in Rio, it's quite defeating because it's unfortunately the only one people really pay attention to. And so I knew that we'd had a very successful season and that, you know, we'd proven ourselves to be one of the fastest teams in the world, but people don't know because the Olympics is the one that people pay attention to. And even in our own minds too, like the Olympics is what you're training for. And so, you know, if the journey wasn't something that you paid attention to, or if you didn't make sure the journey counted and you were very outcome based, it can sort of put a veil over your experience. And so I think it's important, and it's something that we did going into Tokyo, was to make sure that every moment counted and that you always were doing everything you possibly could so that if you did get to the end and you didn't stand on a podium again, you at least had your best race so that you could walk away proud no matter the result. Because I mean, I'm incredibly proud of everything that we did leading into Rio, but it was hard not to stand on a podium, and because we knew we had the ability to, we just didn't put out our best performance on the day. So I think that's one thing that makes Tokyo so special is, I mean, I would have been proud of that race even if we hadn't won, because internally we put together every single thing that we talked about and had the best race that we could have as a boat. And so I would have been proud no matter what, but I think the gold medal just represents our, like, the hard work that we put in and our ability to make it happen as a group on the day. Because everybody trains hard, everyone's fit, everyone wants it. And so it's just the team that can do it when it counts. So I think it's pretty special to be able to hold the one that everybody looks at and know that it's mine, even though sometimes I look at it and I'm like, did I steal this?
Bring that to the local bar for a free drink at any time, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What is your favorite part about representing Canada in your sport?
I love representing Canada. I'm proud to be Canadian, even having grown up in the States. Like, I'm very proud to be Canadian. I think for me, I mean, obviously we're stereotypically known to be very kind, but I think we're also quite diverse. And I think instead of, you know, sort of just cramming everybody together, we are trying very hard to celebrate everybody's differences. And so I think I'm proud to be Canadian because they're internationally, acclaimed as being a great country. I'm very proud of, how we handle ourselves as a team when we're overseas. I have great friends in the US, but it's pretty hilarious when you stand on the podium and somebody says to you, like, oh, as long as the US wasn't on the podium, like, we're happy.
Yeah.
So brutal. It's so mean. But I'm proud to be a part of a country that doesn't get that kind of conversation.
Yeah.
So I don't know. And the people on the US team are amazing. So it has nothing to do with them. But I think Canada just represents home for me and diversity and a celebration of that.
Very cool.
That's awesome. And so the Olympics this year obviously were a lot different due to COVID and the pandemic going on. So the Olympics were supposed to be in 2020. Obviously all this stuff happened, and then it was pushed to 2021. How did this kind of like affect your training and like traveling across the world in a global pandemic, having to push it an extra year? How was it trying to deal with all that stuff and still getting ready for the Olympics?
Finding out that the Olympics was delayed was difficult. I think we had 42 days before the games when we found out that they were going to be delayed another 365.
Wow.
Oof.
So that was a lot to add to the countdown on our wall.
Yeah.
I think everybody sort of had their own moment to deal with the situation and interpret how they wanted to handle it. But one thing that was special about our team is we didn't lose a single athlete in the delay of the Olympics. A lot of international rowing teams had people retire or quit or move on because the year was, it was too much time for them or for other reasons. And so it was special that we had 100% retention in the extra year of training. It's my opinion. I can't speak for everyone in my boat, but I can confidently say that for myself, had we raced in 2020 when we were supposed to, we would not have stood up on the podium. We were dealing with quite a lot as a team in early 2020. Our team culture wasn't very good. We had a couple of coaching shifts. And so we took that extra year to really restart and make the best of that time. We decided that it was our time and that we were going to rebuild culture as a team. We were going to rebuild our communication with each other and actually support each other versus just say we were going to. So I really think this extra year was a huge benefit for us as a team. It was an opportunity to redo all of the things that we would have wanted to have changed had we had the time, and we were just lucky enough to get it.
Blessing in disguise.
Absolutely.
You did, because you attended, excuse me, I'm just going to start that question again. Because you went to the Olympics beforehand, and you've had the full, stadium filled with people or, big audience experience. How does that compare to now, this pandemic version? Watching the Olympics was very interesting this year with, lots of empty seats around, these Olympians doing these incredible feats, and I would see them. It's like this silent moment of cheering. Where I'm wondering where are they looking? Who's looking, kind of thing. I was wondering what the difference. What's that difference kind of like?
I think it was less different for us than it would have been for a sport like track or basketball, where you would typically have a lot of spectators. Rowing is not typically a spectator sport. There was obviously a difference in that our friends and family couldn't be there, which are the people that we missed the most. We wouldn't have been able to spend time with them throughout our time in Tokyo, so we would have seen them after the race. And obviously that's a very special moment to have. And so I missed that for sure. But like I said, we don't usually have that many people watching us. So it was different for sure. And I missed having family members. But other than that, our games ran not all that different for us than it would have otherwise. Typically, when we're leading into a race, we're fairly, closed off to what's going on around us. Like we wouldn't be going out and exploring much, or, there's things in the village you can do, like there's a hair salon, a nail salon, all the fun things. Like we wouldn't have really done that anyways. So I think the biggest difference was really just not being able to see our friends and family when it was over and share that moment with them in person. And then not being able to stay in the village when the Olympics were done for us. About 24 hours after our race, we were packing and heading on a bus to get on a plane. Whereas in a non-pandemic games, we would have stayed in the village until the Olympics were done and gone to closing ceremonies, which is always a lot of fun because you can go and see other people compete in different sports, and you can actually sort of be your own spectator at the Olympics. So I missed that aspect of it, but the actual competition and racing was all quite similar for us.
I was gonna say, yeah, the meeting. It's known in the village. Like, there's lots of kind of meeting people, right? And getting to experience all these incredible athletes from other countries and different cultures and backgrounds. There, unfortunately, this year probably was a lot less of that.
Yeah. We really enjoy being able to mix and meet with other people when we're in the Olympics. And I mean, we do this thing where we trade pins. I actually have a couple of them here, but it's like a safe way to kind of communicate with other athletes.
Nice.
And so you can trade and get like a different logo from another country. And so luckily we were still able to do that because it happens outside. It's quick, it's fun, it's easy, but you can, some of them are, like Canada had the moose pin, which was the pin of the Olympics. Everybody wanted this one.
Nice.
But
Very cool.
It's great to
it
hear.
was fun to be like, I miss being able to obviously visit Tokyo and, learn about the culture and meet the people. And I mean, not being able to sort of interact with other athletes is always kind of annoying, but we were able to do some small things in safe ways.
And I have to ask, it was all over TikTok and all the social media that was going on in the Olympic Village. I have to ask about these cardboard beds and if they're really that big of a deal that was being made all through social media.
They were in fact cardboard, yes.
Yeah.
The frame of the bed was cardboard. The mattress was made from recycled plastic. So if you unzipped the mattress cover, it looked like plastic noodles on the inside.
Oh man.
Wow.
They were not comfortable, but they were sustainable. We actually were lucky enough to have some mattress toppers provided to us by our specific sport federation, which made a big difference. I can say that we did test their stability. When you say to an athlete, you can't put more than 2 people on this bed, we're all competitive. So the first thing we're going to say is, all right, challenge accepted. Let's see what happens. And so all 8 or 9 of us from our boat piled onto one of the beds and sort of all sat there and watched a movie together. And I mean, it was fine. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, we didn't jump up and down on it or anything like that, but it definitely was able to hold the weight of 9 of us.
That's so cool. And it was fully sustainable too. So that's actually, maybe that was actually really cool.
Yeah, actually most of the infrastructure at the games was structured around being sustainable. The apartment buildings that we stayed in are actually already all sold to be housing for Japanese citizens. And so to make it so they wouldn't have to repaint everything in the building was temporary. So the walls were just, they were unpainted. They didn't have any finishing on them. The bathrooms were plastic inserts. And so it looked like in a plain bathroom. Sort of felt like it was in this dome cube. And so nothing was decorated. And I mean, we did our own. We put up flags and, you know, letters from family and everything and made it our own. But it was all done with the idea of not having to redo anything when it came time to sell them.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Makes for a little bit of I can imagine you walking in the first time being like, where are we? None of the walls are even done.
Yeah.
It's quite wild, and the doors don't match like the top of the door frame. There's a little bit of space and everything. So had we not known going in, we've given like a bit of a hint to us. I think it would have been an interesting experience, probably a shock, but luckily we knew going in. Otherwise I probably would have been like, are we in the right place?
Other than winning the gold, which is obviously probably the best thing, but what was your favorite moment of the 2021 Olympics?
I think it would have to be spending time with my teammates. It's a pretty special thing to be 30 years old and have roommates that are all your close friends that you spend all that time with, and, you know, get to compete against the best in the world. It's a pretty unique lifestyle. And I think that will probably be what I miss the most, is spending that time with them and, you know, going on trips and having that time to hang out and laugh and reminisce about previous trips. But it was a lot of fun to stay in one apartment all together and, you know, sit and watch the live feed of the competitions that were going on and, you know, ask when we all wanted to go to dinner together. And it was a very special, unique moment to be able to have all of us together there in that time, and one that probably won't happen again for years to come. And so I think my favorite moment would have to be sharing that experience with them.
I'm sure that if asked, they'd all say the same, and not the food or something like that.
Well, if they hear this, that better be their answer now.
What's maybe just as a random it's so funny. What's the most random thing that that happened at the Olympics this year?
Most random thing. I don't know if I guess it was kind of random, but I was eating dinner with one of my teammates one night, and she happened to glance out the window, and she sort of just was like, oh my gosh, that's Andy Murray. And I was like, no way. There's no way it's Andy Murray. He would be for sure protected by a bunch of people. She was like, no, I swear that is Andy Murray. And so we just happened to see him when we were eating dinner, and we went outside and like little fangirls tracked him down. And we got a photo with him, and I traded pins with him. But, you know, it's a big deal when rowers get up from their food that they haven't eaten yet to go and meet somebody. So we prioritized Andy Murray over dinner. So that was a pretty cool thing.
That's amazing. Getting to see a big athlete like that. I mean, he's a looker too, so I mean, it doesn't hurt either, right?
No, of course not.
And I actually have one more thing before Aaron's next question here. What's something that people wouldn't expect to be happening at the Olympics that is maybe like a regular thing that happens there?
We talked about this a lot as a team, actually. The behind the scenes of the Olympics is really not what people would expect. There's a lot of downtime because for us, you're in what's called a taper. So we're not training as much, and we're trying to kind of let our bodies come back up to feel more recovered from all of the training that we've done. And so you're relaxing and you're sitting around a lot. And so we would be all sort of sitting around and hanging out in our apartment watching The Bachelor, or, you know, eating licorice and chocolate, or, you know, deciding if we wanted to go for a walk because we're kind of getting antsy in our rooms, or spying on our neighbors in the building next to us. So I think the thing that people don't expect to see is, you know, that behind the scenes image of all of us just sort of laying in our beds all day. So, I mean, when you've got a really hard race the next day, you can't really be walking around and doing stuff. And so it's kind of funny when you see these people competing on TV, you know, against the best in the world, and then think like, oh, for the past 12 hours, they've literally been in their bed binge watching Love Island. I think that's what surprises people the most is just how much downtime there actually is.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, actually. That makes so much sense. And if you guys had stuck around afterwards, if it weren't the pandemic, you'd have even more time to just like actually celebrate without having to continue training of any sort, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be a lot of partying, probably.
Yeah.
McDonald's immediately called.
In line all day. They weren't actually a sponsor at this Olympics, which was so sad because in Rio, it's you can eat as much as you want, which is probably not a good thing. But I mean, you just could go line up at McDonald's and it's all free, and so you just go up in line and you say, I want that and that and that, and they just give it to you, and you can walk away and eat your heart out.
Oh my goodness, that sounds amazing.
As I say, that's the dream.
That's the world I want to live in. Where it's healthy though, but where it's healthy.
Of course.
What is some advice that you would give to someone whose dream it is to go to the Olympics, like either for rowing or not?
I think it would be something that I said earlier, would be that if it's something that you want to do and it's a dream, set your mind to it, but acknowledge that there's steps along the way that happen. And so it's not going to happen in a day. It's not going to happen in a week. You're not going to be the best you can possibly be quickly. It's going to take time, but to stick with it. And if you really want it, don't let somebody tell you no. I had a lot of schools say, you're not going to be fast enough. We can't give you a scholarship, but it's just all about, that one yes. All it takes is someone to say yes. And so I think just being patient with yourself and knowing that it's possible, it'll just take time and it won't happen quickly.
Believe in yourself.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. We are going to get into some London-based questions, as we are the London's Pretty Cool podcast. But is there anything you wanted to let our listeners know about really anything? Normally when we do this, it's because we're talking to a local business or something like that, and we want to go, hey, like, give us your contacts and stuff like that or do you have a promotion going on? But is there anything you wanted to let our listeners know, in general about yourself or about the Olympics?
The first thing that comes to my mind is what I do with my free time. I try not to be too rowing focused all the time. I obviously need to be making it my priority, but it's important to sort of turn my mind off from the rowing world. And the way I do that is by baking. And so it's probably a little unfortunate that I'm not in London and sharing this because where I'm currently based in BC, I have a small sort of in-home baking business.
Wicked.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's quite fun. I started it because people kept asking me to make treats for their birthday, and at a certain point I thought, I'm doing this for free. I should probably start charging people for at least the ingredients. But I love sort of being able to shut my mind off and going through the mechanics of baking and mixing things and then spending hours decorating and trying to make things look nice. And it's fun. I have a very small Instagram account called Sweets by Susanne that really doesn't get a lot of traffic, but it's enough of an enticement for me to make my things look nice so that if I show it off, people will hopefully enjoy it. But yeah, I enjoy in my free time I love baking. It's tough to do it now because I don't have a team to share it with, and so I've had to kind of tone it back because if I end up with 24 cupcakes in my house, I will eat them, and that's really not what we need.
I wish we could take part and enjoy some of those sweets as well. That sounds really fun and really good, actually.
I was going to say, we know people out there, so we'll definitely send them your way.
There you go. I'll just have to let you know when I'm back in London.
Perfect.
Yeah, do a pop-up here in London. That would be great.
Oh, there you go. That's a great idea, actually.
We'll be there. We'll help promote, all that jazz.
Gonna hold you to it.
So we are now going to get into our London-based questions. We are the London's Pretty Cool podcast, as you know, and being a London person yourself, this will be great to know just what you think about the city and some of the special things about it.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
So let's get started. I always think this is an easy one, but most of our guests find this very difficult. What would you say is your favorite place to eat in the city?
Oh man. It's funny. I actually think that is kind of hard. I'm very much like a mood-based eater, to my husband's hatred, but you really can't go wrong with like a really nice burger. And so I would have to say that I think it's called Burger.
Yeah.
I'm honestly usually too distracted by what I'm going to eat to remember the name of the place, but I think they have that one that is like grilled cheese as the buns. I mean, if you're going to go big, you got to go all the way. So I would say it would have to be a nice burger.
I've had that burger a few times before. That is a day finisher. Like doesn't matter what time of day it is. That is all you're doing for today.
The food coma is real.
What about neighborhoods? We are the city of neighborhoods here in London. What is your favorite neighborhood?
I think I'm probably a little biased because I grew up in Old North. So I would have to say Old North. I guess my alma mater would be Central Secondary School and the school formerly known as Ryerson. So I have to stick with the OG and say Old North.
What is a London small business that you couldn't live without?
I would go with Hairstrong, actually. It was started by a rower at Western, and it's a scrunchie company that is the first adjustable hair scrunchie. And as someone who spends 6 to 8 hours a day working out, I'm constantly trying to just like look for something that will deal with hair and exercising. So when I met her and heard that this was something that she was doing, I think it's really taking off, but it's changed our rowing world. So Hairstrong, what she does is awesome.
Very, very cool. If you were to have the perfect day in London, what would that entail?
One thing that I used to do when I lived there, it sticks in my mind a lot, would be to run errands with my sister. Sounds silly and maybe simple, but we would go to Starbucks and aimlessly shop the mall, buy things we didn't need at HomeSense, and just sort of spend time together. And then we'd pick up my brother later in the day and go to dinner at I think it's Milestones that was in Masonville. So it was very much a simple day, but sort of just aimless time spent with family in and around the city. But I mean, I live on coffee, so as long as that's involved, it would be an ideal day for me.
It's always fun going into HomeSense. You always see something, you're like, oh, I'm just gonna go look around, and then you come out with like 3 bags worth of stuff.
You find the things you didn't know you needed.
Yeah, that's the better way to put it. I didn't know I needed this.
Probably don't, but I'm gonna buy it anyway.
What would you say is a hidden gem in the city? So this could be a person, place, or a thing. So it doesn't just have to be a place.
A hidden gem. I think, I mentioned before that I think like Fanshawe is kind of cool. It's, if you don't know it exists, when you go there, you feel quite away from the city, which I think is really awesome. There's so much nature, and the paths that you can walk on around there are really nice. I absolutely love it. I'm sure that there are things that I should be mentioning more so than that, but they're escaping my mind right now. But I mean, I've spent countless hours at Fanshawe, and I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, wow, this exists in London, Ontario. It's very different sort of than the, downtown core. So I would say it's a lovely little getaway in the city.
We, like I mentioned, our pretty much our whole lives, our mom worked and still does work at the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority. So it has been a constant in our lives of even just seeing the rowing team practice and stuff, and like realizing as we got older, like our mom would just mention, like, oh yeah, they're like the Olympic rowing team, like they practice here, and like these are like this isn't just like day camp, that happens.
That's what we're used to,
well. Like we're used to like we did the sailing camp for the week, and that's why we're in these boats or whatever. That's you think that everybody in that area is doing that sort of thing, but it's so interesting that that's this hidden real deal spot which makes so much sense, especially in the area around the dam there, that like it's a great windbreak. I always remember that.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's absolutely. I mean, and I didn't know about it until I was in it. So secret moment. Very
cool. Now we have a classic game that we're going to get into before we end the episode, if you don't mind. It's called This That. Now, this game is a classic, as the title implies, this or that, two choices game. So we're going to give you as little time as possible and no explanation needed for your answers. So we're going to give you two options, and you just got to pick one as quick as you can, okay?
All right, pressure's on.
Pressure's on, that's right.
All right, we'll see your competitiveness come out right now. Western Fair Market or Covent Garden Market?
Covent Garden Market.
Sunfest or Home County?
Sunfest.
Masonville Mall or White Oaks Mall?
Masonville all the way.
Wortley Village or Old East Village?
Wortley Village.
Springbank Park or Harris Park?
Springbank.
Fanshawe College or Western University?
Western University. UWO strong.
Fire roasted coffee or Black Walnut Cafe?
Oh, Black Walnut Cafe.
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Highland Theater or Mustang Drive-In?
Highland Theater. Oh, that's hard too.
Yeah, that is a tough one. I wouldn't know what to answer with that one.
Would you rather bike on the Thames Valley Parkway or hike on one of our trails?
Hike a trail.
And last but not least, for our beer lovers, London Brewing Co-op or Forked River?
London Brewing Co-op. Oh, that's so hard.
Congratulations. You made it through.
Woo!
Well, we just want to say thanks again, Susanne, for taking the time with us this evening. This is really, really cool for us. I hope just to be able to talk to you and learn so much from you. So again, thank you so much. Is there anything you wanted to let our listeners know before we call it quits for the episode today?
No, I think I'm good. I appreciate you talking to me. I mean, it's still new to me to be like exciting and in the rowing world and people talking about it. So I appreciate you talking to me and letting me share rowing with people.
Yeah, hopefully by the end of this episode, your bakery will become like the Instagram. We'll just go way up.
Oh man, I'm told by all my teammates that I need to open one, but we'll see.
Now's the time. I'm
Susanne Grainger, Olympic champion, and you're listening to London's Pretty Cool Podcast.